what should a person's body temperature be? That's an interesting question. Well, everyone thinks that the normal body temperature for a person is 36.6 degrees Celsius. First of all, guys, that's not correct. That's not true. That's a bit of a misunderstanding about this temperature. First of all, where did you measure it? If you measure it well, to measure temperature, people usually put the thermometer under the armpit. Sometimes they hold it in their mouth. Sometimes it's done rectally. But the temperature can vary by a couple tenths of a degree because of that. What we know is not the normal, but the average underarm temperature is 36.6. In general, a temperature measured under the armpit is considered normal if it is a tension from 36.0 to 36.9. So a normal temperature for a person is 36.4, 36.2. From 36.0 to 36.9 is also considered normal because 36.6 is just the midpoint. But this is not the only possible indicator of normal. The normal range is from 36.0 to 36.9. And this is a normal temperature for a person. When a person measures this temperature with a thermometer under the armpit, then 36.9 is the upper limit of normal temperature. But besides what is considered normal, there are situations when it changes. First of all, the most important question that I am addressing and which I am sure most people do not know. Moreover, even doctors from Western medicine don't know this. They don't understand how the body heats up at all. Even doctors don't know what makes the human body warm. So the question is, what makes the human body warm? The only reasonable answer I get, but this answer is not true, is that each cell heats itself as a result of glucose breakdown in the mitochondria. In fact, that's not a truthful answer to this question. The thing is, human body cells can be grown in isolation under artificial conditions in a petri dish. For example, you can artificially grow liver cells. Now, what do you think the temperature of these cells will be when they're grown outside the human body, separate from it? I'll tell you, room temperature, cells don't heat themselves, nor can they simply don't have enough energy for that. The human body is warmed because there's a furnace inside it. The liver, the furnace. That's where glucose and glycogen are broken down. The breakdown of glycogen doesn't result in any action. In muscles, it leads to muscle contraction. In the heart, to heart contraction. But the breakdown of glycogen and glucose in the liver doesn't cause any movement, any contraction, or any action. It only produces heat. And this heat is what warms our body. Then afterwards, the heat spreads throughout our body via special channels, the so-called meridians. And it is in this way that the warming of the legs, arms, torso, head, the whole body, and all the organs occurs. And inside, our body is heated to a temperature of 37 degrees. Guys, in every person, the body is heated inside to a temperature of 37 degrees. It is at this temperature that all the internal organs work most efficiently and optimally. In other words, the human body, when heated to 37 degrees, can function in the most proper way. And it is precisely then that the best, most optimal functioning of all the internal organs occurs. This includes the brain, digestion, the work of the kidneys, the functioning of everything in our body. But it is the brain that regulates this temperature. The brain contains in its central and brainstem structures certain receptors that determine this temperature, and accordingly through the hypothalamic pituitary system that sounded complicated through the thalamus, hypothalamus, and nervous system structures that regulate the activity of the hormone producing pituitary gland. It regulates temperature by, let me explain, releasing thyroid hormones. That is, the thyroid hormones determine the increase and decrease in temperature. And what's most interesting is that with hypothyroidism, and there are too few thyroid hormones, the temperature can decrease. A person's normal temperature might be 35 degrees, and that's normal for them, not a sign of illness, sir. On the contrary, Someone might have a temperature of 37.5, and that would also be normal for them, simply because that's how their thyroid gland and its hormones function. What else should we understand? Often, temperature rises due to the development of a disease in the body. And again, this increase in temperature happens primarily through central mechanisms. That is, the intensity of heat production, the intensity of temperature generation in the liver occurs due to commands from the brainstem. Because a person is experiencing an inflammatory process, maybe they caught a cold, or there's some kind of inflammation, the central nervous system, the brain, the brainstem structures immediately send commands to increase heat production in the body. And as you can imagine, a person's temperature rises. Here's what you need to understand. If the temperature rises from 37 to 38 degrees, we call it subfebrile. To put it simply, febris means fever and subfebrile means pre-fever. And at this temperature, it is absolutely necessary for boosting a person's immunity. In other words, our body's resources are such that it can withstand this 1 degree difference in temperature. Basically, if my normal temperature is 37 and I feel great, but it rises by 1 degree to 38, I'll start to feel unwell, my whole body will ache, I'll feel chills, and I'll be shivering. But at the same time, my brain is still functioning normally, the digestive enzymes are more or less working, urine continues to be produced properly in the kidneys, and the body, though not perfectly, is still functioning and fulfilling its role. This is a subfebrile temperature, which is why we don't lower it. If your temperature is between 37 and 38 degrees, as you've measured, then in this case, pay attention, your immunity is boosted tenfold. This is necessary to fight off the infection that caused the fever, but at the same time, the body's functioning is not yet disrupted. What do you need to understand? If the temperature rises above 38 degrees, from 38 to 39, that's a fever, or febris is in Latin. So when a febrile increase in temperature occurs, changes in the brain begin to take place. The brain stops properly controlling things like heat production, the functioning of the autonomic nervous system, regulation of blood pressure, acid-base balance, vascular tone, and breathing. In other words, during a fever, the functioning of the entire body becomes disrupted, and the febrile temperature needs to be brought down. So, if your temperature is already between 38 and 39 degrees, it needs to be reduced. You should use antipyretic medications, because otherwise the body's ability to function is severely impaired. If the temperature is above 39 to 40, and then even higher, 41 or more, I call that terminal or premortal temperature. That is, this is a temperature that will lead to a person's death. This is something that a person can die from. At such a temperature, there is significant disruption of the fundamental brainstem functions that sustain the body's vital activity. This includes breathing, spontaneous breathing, the respiratory center, the vasomotor center, which maintains blood pressure, and in general, the body's vital functions. And that's why at temperatures of 39 to 40 degrees, guys, these are intensive care patients where you have to understand that at any moment a person's life could end, the heart could stop beating. And because of this, such temperatures are considered a significant health risk. They require urgent intervention, and clearly, to be direct, these are intensive care patients. So 39 to 40 degrees is already a very dangerous terminal stage. This is a high fever. If we go in the other direction, by the way, when the temperature rises to 38, 39, 40, the immune system doesn't get stronger. On the contrary, it gets weaker. That is, the immune response does increase. Yes, it increases tenfold. At a temperature of 37 to 38, the immune system remains just as strong. At 40, it actually drops a bit and doesn't function as it should. It's not advisable. Therefore, to avoid interfering with the immune system, we don't lower the temperature if it's between 37 and 38. But if it goes above 38, we reduce it strictly for vital reasons. Simply put, so that the person doesn't die. And it's important to understand that problems with lowering temperature are also connected to immunity. If the temperature drops lower, say from 35 to 36, I call that a decrease in immunity. In this case, the immune system functions at about 30% of its capacity. Blood moves slower, body freezes, immune system lacks time to respond, its effectiveness drops significantly. This happens in hypothyroidism. It also occurs in people with impaired heat circulation. They regularly have cold feet, cold hands, a cold torso, and a cold area around the kidney. In such cases, these are also the same indicators that make it absolutely necessary to warm the person up. When the body temperature drops below 35 to around 34 or 35 degrees, the immune system essentially freezes. In other words, the immune response is insufficient to protect the body. And this temperature of 34 to 35 degrees is a clear sign of the development of oncological diseases. I call it the risk of developing cancer. That is, at such temperatures, it's simply impossible for a person to remain. Yes, it's clear that the functioning of the urinary system and the digestive system is also disrupted. The respiratory system's function is also impaired. The brain does not function properly. There are many disorders, but the most frightening thing is that the immune system stops providing anti-tumor protection. That's why there's a risk of developing cancer. And we observe this. Cancer patients have a low body temperature. We think it's because of the cancer. In reality, cancer arises because there was initially a low body temperature and a weakened immune system. That's why maintaining body temperature is vital for the human body. So today you got a brief overview of temperature in general and what the body's temperature should be. From 36 to 37 degrees, that's the normal range. Anything below 36, 35 and something is considered a low temperature. Anything above 37 is already a high temperature. Both are significant disturbances. Temperature homeostasis should be maintained in the range of 36 to 37 degrees when measuring under the armpit. Well, that was the information for you today. Friends, write in the comments now what other questions interest you. Well, I'm in a slightly different studio now, but it's the same good old studio. We will continue to do these kinds of breakdowns of the most interesting questions, your questions. Write about what interests you. Don't forget to like today's video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and have set the right notification, hit the bell. Share this interesting video about temperature with one of your friends. Well, that's all for today. I say goodbye to you. Always yours, Dr. Holod Volodymyr Myroslavovich. Goodbye, friends.